So where we left off talking in our last class last week, we were finishing up on what's happening in the perfectly competitive market. So a couple of things that we do realize that the firm will take the price as given. The firm is a price taker, and the firm is going to look first for where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. When marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, when the firm finds its quantity, then the firm has to choose or determine at that quantity is the market price greater than or less than or equal to the average variable cost. If at that quantity the market price is greater than the average variable cost at that quantity, then the firm is going to go ahead and produce that positive quantity. But if it is less than, then the firm is going to shut down and produce zero. So that we have learned from long ago. Then we started to talk about the firm's short-run supply curve. And we have now figured out that the short-run supply curve is the marginal cost curve above the average variable cost curve. So if we find the marginal cost curve equation, then remember this is going to be P is equal to some function of quantity. And then we're saying that this is the firm's short-run supply curve beginning from a certain price, right? Or beginning from the price where marginal cost is equal to the average variable cost. We know that this is upward sloping, and this is that portion of the marginal cost curve that is above the average variable cost curve. Oh, okay, I'll look for it. Okay, so so we know that the marginal cost curve is a short-run supply curve. And then we also know that when we sum all of our marginal cost curves together, then we will get the market supply curve. So in a nutshell, basically, if we think about the short run and the long run. So if we think about short-run supply, oh wait, hold on. Hold on a minute. So when we think about the short-run supply for the firm and the market, we know that for the firm, this short-run supply is your marginal cost curve or your marginal cost equation above the average variable cost curve. We could say above the minimum average variable cost, or we can say above the average variable cost curve. It will tell us the same thing. And just to remind ourselves, if we have our sketch, and this is quantity, and this is price, this is our average total cost, this is our average variable cost, and this is our marginal cost, then I'm saying that the short-run supply is going to be this part of your average variable cost curve. The other thing to realize is that when we have it, marginal cost is equal. We're going to have marginal cost, which is a function of quantity, right? So that is the same as saying our price is a function of quantity. To get our market supply curve, we would have to rewrite, right? So this is for the market now. This is the sum of the individual firms marginal cost curves, or curve, individual firm marginal cost curve, right? When you're summing, however, you want to remember that we're summing over quantity, so you have to rewrite that marginal cost equation in terms of quantity. So you want to rewrite the marginal cost equation in terms of quantity and add. And sum over all firms. So when you look at that market supply that we're getting for market supply, we're actually getting or quantity S, which is a function of, if you will, your quantity S, which is a function of price, which is basically rewriting your individual marginal cost curve, as we see. So this is going to be, it's equal to N times your individual quantity supplies, which are as functions of P. Okay, so when we look, so I'm saying all of this for a reason, of course, right? So when we look at the market, here we will have our quantity, here we will have our price. This is our supply curve, right? And this supply curve basically is coming from our market supply as we have. And this is our market demand curve D. And so we'll do the usual as finding our market quantity, Q, and find our market price. How does this translate to the individual firm? So maybe let me do this with a lot more space. So this is, before I do it. So the individual firm, you will find your the price from the market, and that's the price that the individual firm would take. So this would be my supply, this would be my demand. And for the individual firm, if this is the market price, let's say P0, the market quantity here is Q0. This would be your average total cost, let's say, your average variable cost, let's say. This is your marginal cost. And in this case, my P0 is here. This is my P0. This is my marginal revenue curve. So here at this P0, you're finding where price is equal to marginal cost, and you'll get the quantity little q0. Recognizing that with this quantity little q0, that our big Q0 is equal to N, or the number of firms, times little q0. Of course, always under the assumption that little q0, all our firms in the market have the same cost structure. So here in the market, even though all the individual firms' marginal cost curves will sum together to give us the supply curve, they work collectively with the market demand to determine the market price, which is P0. At that market price P0, notice here that for the individual firm, that individual firm is taking the market price as given. So as an individual, you take it as given, but it came about from a collective effort from all the firms in the market, whether it's 100 or 1,000 or so forth, right? So just think back for a second, even though it's not a perfectly competitive market, but to visualize it, just imagine something like, as I mentioned, the food cart meals that they're selling, right? So in such a highly competitive situation, actually, if you guys, I think I went to DC one time and was walking around there by the malls, and you had a lot of food trucks lined up all together, nose and tail all together with each other, and they were selling meals, and they were basically selling their meals at the same price. And that is the idea behind the competitiveness, that everyone is right there. No one food truck can try to influence the market price for these meals, because if you decide to go higher, there's so many other food trucks that people will go to, and the food is basically the same. Consumers perceive it to be basically the same, so they'll go to these other trucks, and then you wouldn't want to sell it at a lower price, because that's going to undercut on your potential profit. So in such a case, you take the price as given, but you can imagine that collectively, just by your behavior of trying to maximize profit, collectively the price is driven to this value of P0. So this is a market quantity. The individual firm takes P0, looks for marginal cost, and finds where the price is equal to marginal cost, essentially where their marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and they get their individual quantity. As we can see in this situation, this particular firm is making a loss. Notice that in this case, the price, notice that the price is less than the average total cost. So this is a corresponding average total cost 0 right there. Notice that if you go up to the average total cost using that quantity, the price is less than the average total cost. So even though we can see that P0 is greater than AVC0, so the firm produces Q0. at a loss, but they do so at a loss, and we know it's a loss because P0 is less than the average total cost at 0. So if the firm is producing this at a loss, the question is, are you going to continue doing this, especially in the long run when you can now change your labor and your capital? Right? So to go with one of the questions here, how do we determine marginal cost? That's actually a very interesting question, because I want you guys to remember that marginal cost is equal to the change in total cost when quantity changes. Okay? And if you think about it, in the short run, only variable cost is changing when you're changing your quantity. So only variable cost changes with quantity in the short run. So your marginal cost, you can basically say it is a change in total variable cost. The change in total variable cost when quantity changes. And so if we think about how we can measure that change in our marginal cost, if you think about it, how we can measure our marginal cost, if you look at how your variable cost changes. So yes, you could look at how the workers, or you could look at how the workers will, how much more do you have to pay your workers, or how much more does the material cost, the ingredients cost for you to produce an additional level of output. So if you think about in real life, basically you don't really need a cost function. If you find that cost function, you can determine your long run price, if you will, and this is under the assumption that there are no changes in the market. But so you could do that, but you don't have to find a cost function if you have an idea of what your marginal cost looks like. In other words, you really don't need fixed costs if you have an idea if you know exactly what your marginal cost looks like. So really quick, I just want to finish up on this. Notice that the firm is making a loss. And so the question is, will the firm want to continue making a loss in the long run? And the idea is that in the long run, if you see that you're making a loss in the short run, in the long run, you're now going to start thinking about, in the long run, you're going to start thinking about, am I going to continue producing in this market? Am I going to continue producing this amount? Do I want to produce more? Do I want to produce less? All of these things are going to come into your mind in the long run. And basically now you're going to start saying to yourself, am I going to continue producing, or am I going to leave this market? So with making an economic profit, one thing is for sure is that no one will try to come into this market, because now they're seeing that firms are making a loss in this market. And as a savvy entrepreneur looking in on this market, this is not going to be a venture that you want to enter into or engage in. So you're not going to go into the market. So for those of you who are already in the market, the incumbent firms, now you're going to start thinking, am I going to stay or am I going to leave? And the idea is that some firms will begin to leave. And as firms begin to leave the market because they're making a loss, so in the long run, basically they're not renewing their lease. They're not trying to, they're getting rid of their capital, their machinery, and their equipment. They get rid of their loans, etc. That they give back the machinery and equipment to the bank, and they default on the loans. However it is, they get out of this market, but essentially they exit the market. And when firms begin to exit the market, what I want you guys to notice is that from long ago in chapter 2, we know that the number of firms is a determinant for our supply curve, such that if the number of firms decreases, the supply curve shifts to the left, and if the number of firms increases, the supply curve shifts to the right. So in such a situation, your supply curve will shift to the left, right? So your supply curve will shift to the left as firms leave in the long run. So I want to say that. So in the long run, and this is before we get to equilibrium. Right? In the long run, they leave because they're making an economic loss. Now, before I get to what is happening in the long run, I want you guys to appreciate with me this idea of an equilibrium, because right now this is a short run equilibrium, meaning that the market is clearing. Notice supply is equal to demand. There is no excess quantity, nor is there there's no surplus, nor is there a shortage, right? So there's no excess, nor is there a shortage of quantity, a shortage in the amount that people would like to purchase. So the market clears. And because the market clears, we know that we're in an equilibrium. But in this situation, we're going to say we're in a short run equilibrium because firms are enjoying an economic loss in this particular equilibrium, and it's not something that they would want to do, right? You didn't go into this market as a firm to produce and supply a good or a service to make a loss, right? That's not a good use of your resources, and you know there are more likely better opportunities for your resources. So here, when I talk about in the long run, I'm not talking about the long run equilibrium yet, but what I'm talking about that time period in which you can make adjustments. And so in the long run, firms can make that adjustment of saying, I'm going to get rid of my machinery and equipment and I'm exiting this market. And here I'm saying that firms are going to leave because they're making an economic loss, right? So they recognize they were making an economic loss in the short run. So if they get an opportunity, they will leave. And in such a case, then you can imagine that your supply curve will shift to the left. What you want to realize is that as firms leave, right, supply curve will shift to the left. So market supply shifts to the left. Market supply shifts to the left, and the market price will increase, and your market quantity will decrease. And this will continue until we get to that long run market equilibrium. Okay, so just to repeat what I said. So in the short run, the difference between our short run and our long run, just to make sure you get it, in the long run, you can adjust labor and capital. In the short run, you can only adjust labor. You cannot adjust capital. 1. 2, another characteristic of our market that we want to be careful and aware of is the market being in equilibrium. So here, even though we're not in long run equilibrium, here the market is in a short run equilibrium, right? Market supply is equal to market demand, and we find that equilibrium price and that equilibrium quantity. The market has cleared, right? So there's no excess supply and there is no shortage or excess demand, if you will. There's no excess demand and no excess supply. The market cleared. Quantity demanded is equal to quantity supply. Exactly what people want to purchase is exactly what they're able to purchase and firms want to sell at the price P0. But what is true is that at this point, in this scenario, at the price P0, that the firms in the market are enduring an economic loss. It is a loss sufficient enough for them to produce a positive amount, but in itself, it is a loss anyway. And this is not something that you'd want to sustain in the long run. So if you find yourself making a loss for whatever product you're selling in the short run, you're going to continue in the short run. But when the long run comes around, now you have decisions to make. So when it is time for you to renew your lease, now you have decisions to make. And when it is time for you to make any changes to your interest rate, now there are decisions to be made. And in this situation, you're going to say to yourself, I'm making an economic loss. Why am I going to renew my lease and lock myself into this business where I'm not earning a profit? Remember, you go into this thing to earn a profit. So in this case, you're going to end up leaving. So firms are going to begin to leave the you could also use that to find that. Okay. Now, with that being said, if we think about the market already in equilibrium, we're going to go straight to answering some questions. But I just want to make one final point here. Let's just say the market in equilibrium. Let's just think about the market in long run equilibrium. And I'm going to try to graph it side by side. As you guys could probably tell by now, art wasn't my best skill in school, but I did enough to get by and survive. As you know, back in those days, you really couldn't get further if you didn't know art. They would not have graduated me, and I wouldn't be here teaching you. And that in itself is a tragedy. So I wasn't here. So let us be happy in these times that we all get to meet, even though it's virtually. Thank you for giving me company. Thanks for the company. Sometimes, it can be lonely. Okay, so here in this situation, this market is in long run equilibrium. Notice that in the market, this is our market over here. This is our market. And this is our firm. Notice that the market clears. This is equilibrium. Market demand is equal to market supply. So, you could say quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied at P0. So the market clears. We also know that our quantity Q0 is equal to the number of firms times little q0. And our little q0 is going to be the number of output, the quantity of output that the individual firm produces. If we look over at the firm, the thing that we notice is that what? Price is equal to marginal cost, and it's also equal to our average total cost. So we notice then that not only is the firm producing Q0 at Q0, we also notice that and the profit at Q0 is equal to 0. So the firm's profit at Q0 is equal to 0. So this is a long run equilibrium. What will happen if, for example, demand increases or demand decreases? I think one of the class notes talks about demand increases. So let's make demand decreases for variety. So let's say, for example, that what we're having, exactly what we're having, the pandemic, etc., and people are less confident about the future. They feel a lot of some insecurity about what's going to happen. So there is a consumer pessimism. And because of this consumer pessimism, what usually happens when people are unsure of the future is that they will tend to, one, either overbuy on certain goods and services, but two, also more importantly, especially if it has nothing to do with goods and services not being available, they will hold their money. If they think that the stock market is crashing, people are losing jobs, etc., they may decide that they're going to hold on to their money, and so demand decreases. Or maybe they just don't have the money. And so for whatever reason, we're seeing a situation where demand is going to decrease. So if our demand decreases, so that's the example that we're giving here, we're going to say demand decreases. If our demand decreases, as we know, our demand curve will shift to the left. And we'll get a price P1, and the market quantity is Q1. Now, we can always find what this new market price is when demand decreases, because this new market price is found with the new market demand and the O supply curve. So here, I'm saying demand decreases. Then your demand curve shifts to the left, your market price decreases to P1. When your market price decreases to P1, notice what will happen to the firm. The firm is going to get a short run shock, right? Because this is your new market price at P1. And this is your MR, of course. The firm is going to get a shock where in the short run, the firm is producing a lower quantity. So the firm produces a lower quantity and enjoys an economic loss in the short run. And enjoys an economic loss in the short run. So what will happen over time? I think somebody's telling me, let me see. Yeah, they're enjoying it because what else is there to do, right? So you're going to enjoy it. So they're enjoying this economic loss. So over time, as I've been mentioning, they're going to realize, wait a minute, this is not something that's sustainable. So when they can make changes to their position in the long run, that is, they can make decisions to leave the market, change out their capital equipment, and so forth, then what we're going to have is that firms will begin to leave in the long run, right? So firms will leave in the long run. and the supply curve shifts to the left. I'm going to use a different ink to shift my supply curve to the left because I want you guys to see that this will continue until we get back to P0. So firms will shift, and this will continue until we get back to P0. Your market price remains the same. Your market quantity, however, decreases. And if your market quantity is decreasing and the price is the same, then we also know that the number of firms in the market decreases. I just said they left. So number of firms in the market decreases. Number of firms in the market decreases. The individual firm and price remains the same. So profit is equal to 0. Individual quantity will go back to Q0. Now, there's something that I want to draw your attention to, that here, as I was trying to say from the last class, is that this is under the assumption that we have a constant cost industry. So I want you guys to keep in mind that here we're talking about a constant cost industry, meaning that the cost curve, the long run cost curve, is horizontal. So this is your long run supply. The long run supply curve, I meant to say, is horizontal because this is a constant cost industry. If this was an increasing cost industry, then you would imagine that as firms are leaving, that the cost to the industry will actually get smaller and smaller. So you're going to find that you will have the long run supply curve is sloping upwards, meaning that at higher quantities where you have more firms, it is a higher price to supply that good, or there's a higher cost in producing and supplying that good. If it is a decreasing cost in industry, then the supply curve will be sloping downwards in such a case. But this would be the long run supply, not a usual short run supply, etc. So what I want you guys to notice that at your new when you go back to P0, notice that the new market quantity is now I put it as Q2, and it's a new market quantity Q2 because even though the price is back at P0 with less firms in the market, this quantity is going to be even smaller. Okay. New market price remains the same at, and I wanted to say here, this is P0. Market quantity decreases to Q. Okay, so let us ask a poll just to make sure. And then we're going to look at the electricity. So there's a poll question for those of you who can answer. That would be fantastic. Oh, that's great. Love the answers that are coming up. Very good. Anybody else would like to answer the poll? I have only 23 people. Okay, great. So the majority of you actually are following, and that is fantastic news. And the minority of you that responded are also following, albeit a little bit, and you say that you will catch up soon. I have a 72% response rate, but I know that some people are unable to see the poll, so I can understand you being unable to see the poll, whether because you are, something else is going on or you just can't see it. Fantastic. This is what the poll results look like. Most of you that responded say that you're following. Most of you that the remaining few of you that responded also said you're following, but you'll catch on soon. So that's great news. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward in looking on our monopoly market structure. We've just talked a lot about looking on our perfectly competitive market structure, and it's at one extreme of our markets in terms of their level of competition. Now, this is our highly competitive market structure. There's so many firms in the market, and no one firm can influence the market price, so they take the price as given. And we talk about long run and short run situations, long run and short run equilibrium, so to speak. And basically, these firms in the market have a negligible impact in part because they have a very small market share, right? So perhaps the quantity demanded in the market demand quantity is 5,000, but each firm they have the capacity to satisfy and sell only 200. So you can never satisfy, or 150. You can never satisfy that market all by yourself. When we move to the other extreme, now we're talking about the monopoly. And here in our other extreme, we're having only one firm that is satisfying the market demand. So if the market, the total quantity demanded is 5,000, then this one firm has the capacity to satisfy that 5,000, to produce and sell the 5,000 units that's being demanded. So the important implication by this is that we need to talk a little bit more about how this market structure came about, like how do we have our monopoly, but to realize that our firm in the monopoly market is also trying to maximize their profit. So they're also looking for where total revenue minus total cost is at a maximum, where the profit is at a maximum. So that firm is also looking for where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Now, this goes back to the point that I was trying to say earlier on, where even though we know it's price equal marginal cost, we got very relaxed in saying that over time. I want you guys to keep in mind that it's marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. It just so happens for the competitive firm that they take the price as given, and because they take the price as given, the competitive firm faces a horizontal demand curve for its good, and it's the horizontal demand curve for its good would lead to the price being equal to marginal revenue. On the other hand, here, or at the other extreme, where we have the monopoly by himself facing that downward sloping demand curve, as it turns out, the marginal revenue and the price are not the same for quantities that are positive, any quantity greater than 0. So here, let's talk about, so we give our heading, our monopoly market. So similarly as with our competitive market, this firm is going to try and find the quantity where their profit is at a maximum, right?